Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Relationship Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Jessica Coe, and I'll be your host again today. So, I actually am from Minnesota. I live in the Twin Cities, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about what's been going on in the Minneapolis area. Last night I stayed up until 1 a.m. watching a stream of the riots that are happening in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Luckily for me, it's across an entire river. It's far enough away, about a 15-minute drive, where I'm not personally affected. But all last night, all we heard was sirens and there was a helicopter. We're not sure if that is from the actual riots themselves, but crazy what's going on in society right now. We have a pandemic. We have riots, which are technically protests, but they're more violent. So they actually broke into a Target and sets a bunch of buildings on fire. So hopefully everybody's okay. If you are in that area, be very careful. I just hope the best for everybody and just stay safe, whether it's from, if it's protests, riots, every day-to-day thing, or just staying healthy from the virus. So that being said, I have a fantastic show set up for you today. We're going to talk about dating your coworker for both the first parts of the session, and then we're going to also talk about how responsibility and irresponsibility can be both a turn on and a turn off. I'm actually going to share after that a personal story about how dating somebody with irresponsibility has ended my relationship very quickly. And you can actually take into thought how that can deal with your own relationships and, if you need to work on yourself. I'm going to talk about, in our third segment, what happens when you've never met your boyfriend or girlfriend or significant other. Crazy, right? We'll get into that, and make sure to stick around for some things you really need to know before getting serious. So that being said, I have a great show for you today, and let's start talking about what it's like to date your coworker. Romance is so hard to find after you graduate all of your education. You don't have as many social experiences because you're not stuck in this zoo of, rampant adolescent kids. So it's just hard to find somebody who you really connect with unless you do go out and you go to bars or clubs. Even then it can be really hard because, as the lovely Ed Sheeran has worded out for us, the club isn't the best place to find a lover. So, we end up going to the workplace and we start getting these relationships in our workplace. We can make friends at work, we can make acquaintances, and sometimes we start to get feelings about a coworker. I remember this happening to me when I worked at like a Starbucks or... No, I think it only happened at a Starbucks. So there was only been one Starbucks that I worked at that I had actually worked with, people of other genders. So I did like somebody when I worked at a Starbucks, and I was like super into him, but he very much was not interested in me. So it's hard when you're at work because it starts to create this awkward feeling of, do they want to be my friend? Do they want to be more than friends? And you also have to balance it out with that professionalism. It's especially hard once you get into full-time jobs, office jobs, where you have to act more professional. And office romances, I mean, they're just a part of our culture. You see it all around the world. You see it in media. You see it. It's just stories of how people have met. You guys have seen, a lot of people have seen The Office. A lot of you have seen Parks and Recreation. It's a part of what's going on in the world. So keep in mind that a lot of the reasons that we are maybe find interest in somebody at work is part of convenience. It was easy to meet them. They're right there at work, and we don't really have to worry about like work schedules getting in the way, and it's just so easy to meet somebody that's in your usual space. But keep in mind, this can also be very problematic. One, it can reflect on your work, like just your overall work ethics, and especially if your boss or your supervisor catches wind, it could create maybe some tension between you and your supervisor because they're going to be now worried about this relationship, because it can also reflect on your work abilities. Now, and keep in mind when things may potentially not work out, or where things may potentially not work out, you still have to interact with this person day to day. You are still going to be in the same space. So just really keep in mind, keep that common sense in your head that if you do end up seeing this person, there is the potential, there's the absolute total potential that it's not going to work out, and you're going to have to see them every single day of work unless you or that person chooses to leave that job, which hopefully is not the case, because having a career end all because of a relationship is not very good. So that is one reason to maybe avoid it. If you are really serious about it, you need to think hard. You need to first find out if the business you work with has an actual policy against coworkers dating, because that would be really bad and reflect really poorly on your work ethics. And even if you are under the impression that you can date in secret, or you're gonna go undercover and you're not even ever gonna be noticed because your boss doesn't actually care, you still risk losing your job. Both of you do. And think to yourself, is it really worth risking my job? Or could you wait? You could stay really close friends and just not technically date until one of you finds another job, or until that policy is removed, and which the latter is less likely, but you do have to keep in mind that your job is on the line if you're going to date somebody who you work with while there's a policy against it. And so if your office or whatever business you work at doesn't have an actual policy against dating coworkers and coworkers dating, you do want to keep in mind, think back, was there ever a time when you noticed that somebody, two of your coworkers were dating, and how did it turn out for them? Were they able to do it? Was it looked badly upon? And just really think about how it's going to look to the people around you, both your coworkers and your supervisors. You can even ask a higher up whether or not they think it's right. Try not to talk about it with the people that you actually work with that are on the same level as you, because that can also cause a lot of talk around the office or around whatever space you're working in, and that can just cause more trouble and more rumors. So try to keep it to yourself, and if you need to, discuss it with your employer or whoever you see fit as in charge. If you are able to pursue a healthy relationship that's not putting your job at risk, and both of you are able to keep your jobs happily and move forward, and let's say you and your coworker begin to start dating, really keep in mind that the PDA rule here is still in effect. That means PDA, public display of affection, that is a big no-no at work. That just makes First of all, it makes everyone uncomfortable. Second, it is incredibly unprofessional. And for most businesses, you are expected to keep, if not all businesses, you're expected to keep some form of professionalism no matter how casual the job is. You're still at a place of work. So interacting with your significant other while you are at work, if you both work in the same space, is going to come off as very unprofessional. And you need to consider that if you do move forward in dating a coworker, because you have now, if people know, you're going to have a little bit more eyes on you, especially from like a supervisor, just to not necessarily in a bad way, just to check in and make sure, everything's still running smoothly, that you aren't being distracting. But if you are showing that public display of affection, it just becomes uncomfortable in the office atmosphere, and it can just cause all sorts of problems with the unprofessionalism. So just be very mindful of that. It can also start, like I said before, rumors and gossip, and we just want to be very careful when we're entering a romantic relationship in the workplace. Now, because people are very different when they are at work as opposed to when they are in their own space, when they're feeling comfortable at home or in public, not in their work clothes, out of the uniform, out of the business suit, there's oftentimes two sides of the story there. So you need to figure out if you are able to have a relationship, if you feel that you are going to work out with this person in both their work personality and their at-home personality. So remember, there's oftentimes going to be these two different sides of a person. So my suggestion to you would be to just really, really go slowly with it. Become friends at work. The first step would definitely be to become friends at work. And, it starts off with just a little, talk every day. If you really haven't talked to this person, you just find them attractive, start to get to know them before you get any more serious, because if you don't even know them, that's, you need to take these steps. So get to know them. You take time to be friends if they are wanting to become friends. Keep that in mind too. It's not a one-sided thing. It's both parties have a commitment here to make. So if you are able to get along in the workspace, then you can offer, hey, let's go get some lunch together. It doesn't have to be romantic. It doesn't have to be a date. It could be, hey, I know this cool place down the road. Do you want to go grab lunch there on our break? Something as simple as that it can start off as, it can be really an icebreaker and a way for you to make plans with this person that isn't too much of a commitment. It's not too serious, and it doesn't really feel awkward because it's just food in the middle of the day. And you also have an escape route. You have meetings to get back to. If something doesn't go right during the day, you can say, okay, I need to yeet out of here. I need to get out. And you can just say, hey, I have a lot of work back at the office. I'm going to take the rest of my lunch back to the office. And it'll be more understandable because you are still in this professional you're still in your professional clothes, but you're outside of the professional area. So it's kind of a slow, steady, gradual change from coworkers to friends. So I'm going to continue talking about this same topic in our next segment right after the break. So please enjoy a little bit of downtime. We're going to take just a short break, and I will be back with you very shortly.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Relationship Podcast. My name is Jessica, and we are still talking about dating your coworker. We've talked about a couple of the issues with it and how we need to keep a professional face on when we're at work, even if we do pursue a romantic relationship with a coworker. So we're going to keep talking about just some of the tips I have for you and some of the things you need to keep in mind when you do pursue a relationship with your coworker. Now, we just got talking about one way that you can go from being just coworkers to friends without that, awkwardness of it. And I did mention in the previous segment that you do need to get used to both your coworker if you do consider pursuing a relationship with him or her, and it does seem like it's not going to be a huge impact on your work and your job performance, then you can pursue that, and you need to consider that person as them as a work person and them outside of work. They're going to possibly have, and this is most cases, they'll have two different personalities. They'll have their professional personality as well as their normal, at home, in their comfortable space personality. So if you're going to pursue a relationship with a coworker, you need to be able to be sure that you're compatible with both work person and at-home person. So that's where it becomes very important to start meeting them outside of the workspace. But how do you do that when you're just coworkers? How do you go from just being coworkers to moving into meeting outside of work? And I discussed that you can take your breaks together. You can start offering up lunch during a break, not being creepy, not being weird. And if they decline, just respect that. They might have other things they have to do, or they're just not interested. But if they do agree, it's great to just suggest, like, hey, I know this burger joint down the street. Do you want to try it out with me today? Another great way to just kind of, I don't want to say get on their good side because that sounds manipulative, but just to really show that you'd like to pursue at least being friends. If you want to show that you want to get to know them further, you can ask them if they like coffee or tea, or even a hot chocolate. Bring them that in the morning if you have a morning job, or in the afternoon you can bring an afternoon pick-me-up. You can offer hey, I'm going to run out to lunch if you guys don't have your breaks at the same time. Do you want me to grab you something? There's so many ways that you can start to just show a little bit of interest slowly without it being creepy, and it doesn't even have to be romantic. A lot of workplaces, I've heard this before, will require you to have each other's phone number, oftentimes in case one of you is sick, just for, normal communication purposes within the work area, and that can make it almost hard to resist messaging them. So just keep in mind, you have to keep that professionalism, and don't extend their comfort zones. Don't try to get into their space. It's just going to make the relationship worse. So respect their personal privacy. But if they do show interest in talking, that's okay to just start talking. And really, once you kind of get on that level of acquaintance and almost friend, you can offer like, hey, there's this thing going on tomorrow. Would you like to go with me? Or do you want to get lunch outside of work sometime? Like, my friend's having a party. Do you want to come? Especially right now with, the virus going on, please be careful of that. Please be mindful of staying 6 feet apart and keeping your face mask on. But you can really invite them to things outside of work, as long as they seem reciprocal of that friendship at that point. If they are like totally turned off by it, like you can tell they're just creeped out, maybe it's best to just not move in on that at the moment. But if they show that they're interested, definitely ask them to go somewhere with you. And if they do agree, then you can start to learn about them as a person outside of work. Now, when this happens, you need to keep in mind, like I've put a lot of emphasis on already, you need to keep in mind that they may not act exactly as they do at work. This may be more, like you might like it more than you like their work personality. You might like it less. So you have to keep an open mind and don't know them as just the person at work, because if you do enter a relationship with them, you're going to have to deal with both. Now let's say, hallelujah, we got into a relationship. We are coworkers. There's no policies against it. We're in a totally healthy relationship. And you're like, okay, we're here, and now we have to actually go to work and interact with each other at work. Well, it's important, like I said, to be professional still, not to show PDA. But before you actually have your first day of work together as a couple, this is a conversation you need to have. You need to be on the same page. You have to agree and lay out rules and decide, like, what it looks like to be at work with each other. Because you still have to get your work done, you have to be professional, and you still have to maintain that work ethic and office policy. And you also have to be respectful of your other coworkers and not be just all lovey-dovey around them, because they really don't care. They don't want to hear it. Just don't go up to your office secretary and be like, oh my God, guess what, Megan, I'm dating Brad. You don't have to keep it a secret, just keep it under wraps. It's not a huge deal. And then if you guys do get in an argument or just have little quarrels or something, leave that at home, because it can really stress out your workplace. Not only just you, it stresses out everyone. It can make a bad atmosphere for working and just really ruin everybody's headspace. So keep in mind you have other people around you. And also, don't forget to actually get your job done, because even if your relationship is at work, that means you're still at work. So you still have, your quotas to meet. Maintain your priorities at work and maintain your relationship at home. You also have to keep in mind the potential of you guys breaking up. And I know it doesn't seem like the best idea to talk about breaking up right after you get into a relationship, but it is reality. And at this point, if you are in an office job, you're a grown-up. Let's face it. It's time to grow up. Pull your big boy pants on and talk to your partner about what happens when you break up. Because regardless, you, at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, if you work a morning job, you have to go to work, you still have to see them, and you probably will have to work with them. And you will have to do that for the remainder of your career at that place. So you need to have a plan for once you do decide it's time to end it, if you do get to that point, which hopefully you don't. But if you are pursuing an office relationship, you have to talk about that. So make sure that you and your partner, again, are on the same page with what happens when you break up, and whether it's, okay, we just have to be neutral, we still have to be on, good levels with each other, and we have to be amiable and just get our work done at work. Or is it one of you has to quit your job? And I don't think that's the right way to go about it. So if you do look at it like that, make sure that's really something you're willing to commit to, because breaking up is an absolute possibility. And this is incredibly important if you are dating somebody higher up from you. Keep in mind that if they have the ability to terminate you, this could affect your job in the long run. As unjust and inhumane and unethical as it seems, you have to keep in mind that it is a possibility that you could lose your job if you're dating your boss and you break up. So I know it seems horrible, but just keep that in mind. Even if you have like a super hot boss, just keep in mind that that is always a possibility. And also reflect on whether or not they're able to give you more work. Even if they're not able to terminate you, it's possible that your coworker as a significant other, should you break up, will give you more work. That being said, on the total other side of the spectrum, if you're dating somebody and if you are the significant other that is in the higher up position, it's not right if you break up just to give them more work or to terminate them. So you need to be ethical about your decision making, and you can't just like take all your angers out at the workplace. That's something you need to work out on a personal note at home, not at work. But as I was saying, that being said, if on the other side of things, if you are dating somebody in a higher up position, don't expect to receive less work from them, and vice versa. If you are in the higher position, don't give your SO less work, because a lot of the other employees will definitely notice that, and they'll think that you're favoring them, and if you are, that'll really reflect poorly on you as a boss and a coworker. So that is what I have to say about dating in the workplace. Whether or not you pursue a relationship in the workplace is completely up to you. That is to each their own. But if you do, just remember to be careful about work policy, and if it's going to be right for you, the dangers of what's going to happen if you do commit to that kind of relationship. If you have other questions about dating in the workplace, feel free to ask the GSMC Relationship Podcast Instagram or our Twitter. I will be happy to answer any questions you guys have on there. And if you do want, if we find enough topics to talk about in the workplace, I'd be happy to do another segment on this. So thank you for tuning in with that part. We're going to move on now to the turn off of responsibility, or the turn off of irresponsibility, and the turn on of responsibility, coming up after the break. We'll see you soon.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco, ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hey, welcome back to the Relationship Podcast. We just talked about what it's like to date a coworker, some of the issues you might face, and what are some ways that you can go around facing the issues that can arise from dating your coworker. So if you missed that part, be sure to go back and check it out because it was a lot of information and very helpful if you think you want to pursue a relationship in the workplace. But coming up next, we're going to talk about, right now, we're going to talk about what it's like, how irresponsibility becomes a turnoff. And this is something that hits home so hard because as I am a young, flourishing young lady, I have had my fair share of dating experiences with men and men that are barely men just cannot do the whole responsibility thing. And it's hard because it's a scientific fact that women mature faster than men. And there's so many cases too, and it's not just men. There's plenty of cases where the woman is the less responsible one in the relationship, or where both partners are irresponsible. And this is something you really need to consider before hopping into a new relationship if you feel like you are responsible for yourself or not. And I've talked about this in a couple of my previous sessions where you have to really feel like you can take care of yourself before you jump into a relationship with the potential of having to take care of them in times that they can't. Because relationships are all equality and you just need to be able to take care of yourself. Don't hop into a relationship expecting that person to take care of you and the issues you have. Or just things that you're lacking, common sense, whatever. Try to get a hold of all of those things before you jump into relationships. But what does responsibility actually look like? How do we know if we're being responsible? And responsibility starts with taking care of yourself. That means you're waking up in the morning at a decent time. You're doing everything you can to clean yourself. You just have a really good morning routine. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you wash your face, or you take a shower, whatever have you. You're just taking care of yourself. Your nails aren't overgrown. You've taken care of, or you are trying to take care of all the fungus on your feet. Whatever it is, you want to start with yourself. After that, you move towards the space that you're in. If you're living alone, you want to make sure that everything's as clean as possible. And if you're living with somebody else, you want to do your part in making at least your area clean and helping out in the shared spaces. Because eventually, if you're pursuing a relationship, that person is going to come to your house and they are going to see what you live in, and you're going to be, regardless of whether they're a judgmental person or not, you're going to be judged based on the way that your own home looks. So keep in mind, number one is your own self, because that's how you're going to actually, make this relationship start. It's how you're going to start meeting people. Is we are visual creatures. We're going to look for people, and if you look very unkempt and unhealthy, that's a little bit of a turnoff. And the same goes with your space. Once they come to your house or your room, whatever it is, they're going to see what you live in, and they're going to maybe be turned off if it's a pigsty. Because even going back to biology, it's in human instinct that we look for a mate. It's an animalistic instinct. We look for a mate who is able to provide for us. And if they're not even able to provide for themselves, that's a big, big red flag. So we figured out what it looks like to have your home clean. Now we're going to think about what it looks like to have a job. Think about your age range. Do you have a job that's suitable for your age? Are you working? Are you unemployed? If you're unemployed, a lot of women or men are just going to be like, nope, sorry. Especially because you might be expected, if you are unemployed, they might expect that you are going to rely on them for money. Do you have a substantial paying job? Are you working a part-time and you're barely scraping by on food and month's rent? Or are you working a normal 9-to-5 job? And what's normal for your age group? Everybody is different. Especially if you're in education, that's not expected of you. But if you're in your at least your 30s, you're probably working a 9-to-5, or whatever is usual in your career. And that's going to reflect on how responsible you are, as well as how much you prioritize having a good work ethic. Do you have a reliable source of transportation? This looks different for everybody, especially around the world. In where I'm from, in Minnesota, public transportation sucks. So a normal way that we expect each other to be able to, transport is by car. So if you go on a date with somebody and they don't have a car, that might be a major turnoff, because now you're expected to drive everywhere. But this is totally different if you are living in New York or Seoul, South Korea, maybe Japan. It's totally different because they have a reliable source of transportation. They have subway systems. They have good busing. A lot of places are walkable, bikeable. So that is totally different when you're living in a busy area that has good public transportation. They don't have to have a car. I wouldn't even expect them to have a car if they lived in any of those places I listed. And it's also important to consider how much you rely on your family for things. If you're completely reliant, if you're in your 20s, you are either in college or you're just graduated and you're expected to kind of be more on your own. It's okay to still live at your home in your 20s. Especially in America, you're kind of expected just to move out of home after college, but in a lot of different countries, this is a completely different thing. Especially a lot of Asian culture, they tend to they live with their parents until they do get married, and sometimes even after. So it's a little bit different for every culture, but in America, are you completely reliant on your parents for your income, for your insurance, for your housing and food? Can you cook for yourself? It's the little things. Are you able to do things for yourself, everyday things that then your partner can do with you or you can do for each other? Neither partner should be relied on completely for transportation, work, source of income, the place in which you two are eventually going to share the same space if you do, dates. It's all a working communication between you guys, and it's just, if you are lacking on some of those things, it's just a major turnoff, because then your partner begins to feel less like your partner and more like a babysitter almost, or it's just a weird feeling, because you don't want to feel like you're your partner's mom or dad or their babysitter, because then you're not really in a romantic relationship. It becomes a hassle. It becomes a job. And very mundane, because you have to actually start taking care of this person, and you lose interest, you lose that love for them. And this isn't the case for everybody. Some people like that relationship where they're taking care of their partner all the time. But for a lot of us, it's just very, very difficult to deal with, and it starts to ruin the affection we have for that other person. And most importantly, we want to consider responsibility of our own actions. you can't start blaming your partner for things that they didn't necessarily do. You have to be prepared to take responsibility for mistakes and problems, whether it's a shared blame or if it's really all your fault. You can't just go and blame everything on your partner and say, this is all your fault. Because as soon as you start doing that, your partner is just going to feel insulted, they're going to feel invaded, and it's going to bring up either a lot of defensiveness in them and a lot of aggression, especially when they actually aren't at fault. So be prepared to be able to take responsibility for your own actions and things that occur as a result of your actions, because again, this is a relationship. This is a give and a take. You have to be responsible for yourself first. And those are a couple of reasons why, if you are irresponsible in a relationship, it just is such a major turnoff because, and like I said, it's a part of the human, it's an animalistic behavior. We look for a mate who is able to take care of us. We look for somebody who has those resources. And it's very interesting how it all works. But like I said, it's not every relationship, but it is a lot of relationships. So coming up next, I would like to talk about my own personal story about when irresponsibility completely ruined my relationship. And it took a completely normal, okay relationship to the other end of the spectrum. I completely despise this person after an event. So I'm going to talk about that story coming up next. Enjoy the break, and we'll see you in a moment.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Relationship Podcast. I am Jessica, and we just discussed how irresponsibility is a major turnoff for a lot of people. Not everybody, but most people, especially me, myself. And that is why I'm going to tell you guys all a very important story to really keep in mind, especially when you're dating people from other countries. I am notorious for dating people who are not American. So, especially amongst my family, they all say that same line, why couldn't you just find somebody from America? And I do quite a bit of traveling back and forth between the US and South Korea. So I was studying for a semester at the U of M, and I met a guy on Tinder, as usual. This was a couple of years ago. His name was, we're going to call him Boris, because I'm not going to say his actual name. We're going to call him Boris. That was definitely not his name. And dear Boris, was from China. And he was studying here at the University of St. Thomas, I believe, on a card. I don't know what kind of card, just a student visa, I believe. And we made the decision to go to South Korea because I wanted him to experience, kind of the culture I had recently grown to be a part of, and not very recently, actually. Most of my adult life I've lived there. So I wanted him to be a part of that, and we were taking Christmas vacation to go and spend a month in Korea. So we bought our plane tickets, and it was very interesting how it all ensued, because what happened was I was paying we were trying to buy it together, so we had the seats together. And we ended up buying tickets for the next morning. And I told him, we had made this discussion like a month in advance. I said like, hey, just make sure you have all your visa stuff. And the night before, he stayed over at my house. I was still living at home, and my mom was going to take us to the airport. So I said, even the night before, I'm like, hey, make sure all your visa information is correct. And he's like, yep, I can get in. Even though I'm a Chinese citizen, I have my American visa for being a student. So that'll get me into Korea for 30 days. And if you don't know this, as an American citizen, as a legal American citizen, you can spend up to 90 days in South Korea before having to leave the country. So what happened was we went to the airport, and he started relying on me for a lot of stuff at the very beginning of the trip. And I knew how to navigate the airport, so that was fine. I was just kind of like getting us everywhere. I was making sure we were everywhere on time. I had to wake him up that morning, and I was just making sure everything was on time. And the first red flag that came up, back when we had first started dating, what first came up was that he didn't want to have a job because he almost took a job in the cafeteria as washing, like a dishwasher, but apparently he had seen like a stack of dishes, and he was so grossed out by it, he refused to work. So he just didn't have a job. He was relying on his dad in China to send him money, transfer him money, but that took a couple of days. So there would be times when we would go out to restaurants and he would have no money. His card would be declined. And he would have to call his dad, or I would have to pay, but later he would call his dad and ask for more money. So that was interesting. And he didn't have a car, so I was the one driving all the time. And I lived about 45 minutes away, so that was a big hassle. And so we went on this trip to South Korea, and we were walking through the airport, and he's like, I'm really hungry. I'm going to go get some Panda Express. I'm like, okay, cool. Go get your Panda Express. And I'm walking away because I'm going to go find a banana or something. And I was walking away when I realized I had his wallet. He had asked me to hold on to his wallet, regardless of the fact that he had pockets, which is strange. So I had to run all the way back. I was actually standing in line with my food, and I had to run all the way back to him at Panda Express, which is like on the other side of the terminal. And I was like, okay, you need to actually carry your own weight here. And he's like, okay, I'm so sorry. But at that point, I was already beginning to become fed up with this. And this is a relationship at that point that had been going on for about, I want to say 3 months. So it was pretty steady for a relationship. So we get on the plane, we get all the way there, and he had booked an Airbnb on his account, but I was helping pay for it. And so he had all the information for it. He had all the contact with the Airbnb owner. We'll get to that later. So we get on this plane, and there's so many problems that started with it. There was the first problem where he went to go swipe his passport, and it wouldn't scan because he had washed his passport in the laundry. And this isn't common knowledge, but if you wash your passport, if your passport gets wet, it's going to not work anymore, because from what I've learned from my friends that work in the airline system, that actually ruins there's some detectors or something on the passport, some metal parts inside, from what I know. That I'm not exactly sure, but that will get ruined if it's washed. So he had washed it and he had dried it, which probably didn't help. So it took forever for us to actually get through the passport thing. And we had a layover in Detroit? Yeah, Detroit. And we get there, and this is their first time on this big plane. So we're sitting around for a long time, and they have this new thing where I think it's called a bioscanner, where they scan your face. So we didn't even have to show his passport that time. So we just got right on. And we actually sat in different spots of the plane since we had made the purchase the night before. So we get to the airport in Seoul, South Korea, in Incheon, South Korea. We get to customs and we start going through, and we get split up because they split you up just for going through the customs part. And I get in my separate line, and I was already pretty fed up. I was very tired. I'd been awake for 16 hours at that point after waking up at 5 a.m. in U.S. time. And I was so exhausted from the whole trip. I felt like I was babysitting him the whole way from the airport in Minneapolis all the way until Incheon. And I just was not ready to have any more things. I just wanted to pick up my luggage, get home, take a nap, and go out for dinner with some friends. And instead, what happens is we get to customs. I walk through, and there's this. What customs is they have a booth. They have a couple of booths where there's one worker, and they look at your ID. You scan in, and then you walk through. They let you through this glass, and opens up, and there's this big glass wall, and you can see. You get locked out of there, though. So once you leave customs, you are in the luggage pickup area, and you cannot go back. So I walk through because I just happened to go through first, and I turn around, and Boris is taking forever. And they're just sitting there, like, they're rescanning his passport, and then they start talking, and all of a sudden these two guards come and walk him into another room. And at that point, I was unable to see him anymore because the glass had, stopped, and they had entered an office, and I had no idea what was going on. And I'm sitting there trying to text him, and he's not responding, and I'm freaking out, and I don't know what to do. And so I decide, okay, I need to go downstairs. I'm just going to start finding my luggage, and I'll work on that, and I'll try to get in contact with him. So I'm trying to find my luggage, which, on a side note, had been lost on the trip there. So that was, like, in Texas somewhere for some reason. But I'm waiting for him, and finally he replies with a picture of a deportation letter. Because he was a Chinese citizen, and he was wrong. He was not able to come in with an American visa for 30 days. And he proceeded then to blame it on me that I had told him that he could come to Korea with an American visa for 30 days, which I would never have said such a thing because I know that Americans can come for 90 days. That's all I know. I said, do your research. That's on you. So over the next few, he had to go back that evening. He couldn't even come past customs. There was nothing we could do. So he had to go back, and at that point, I was so embarrassed, and because we were going to go meet my friends for dinner, I was just appalled because I felt bad for him. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go back with him. So I took my carry-on luggage and took myself all the way home to the Airbnb, and once I got there, he would not pick up his phone because he had the passcode to get into the Airbnb. So after that, apparently that was his way of showing his anger and aggression at me to leave me in the middle of December outside, literally December 30th, outside in the middle of Seoul, where it's like 10 degrees out, and I'm locked out of an apartment at night, and I was so cold. And finally he answered and gave me the key, but he blamed everything on me in the end. And that same night, I broke up with him. It ended a 4-month relationship, all because it really did occur because he was not responsible enough to actually make sure that his passport, or make sure that he did have a Korean visa so that he could go. And then other things that really made me just completely lose interest in the relationship was the added-on effect that I felt like I was babysitting him. He blamed it on me. He wouldn't take responsibility for his own actions, and I guess just the fact that he watched his passport was such a problem, and it just really created problems along the journey that didn't need to happen. And finally, it was the lack of responsibility at home that I had overlooked earlier in the relationship with not having a job and not making his own income, relying on his parents too much, and not having a car. So just keep in mind, first of all, if you ever want to go to another country with your significant other who happens to be a non-native citizen of America, you need to make sure that you have the correct visas and paperwork and passports. And also keep in mind that responsibility is really a major part of the relationship. Don't just blow that off as some boring advice. It is very important if you want to maintain a healthy, happy relationship. So coming up next, we are going to talk about what it's like to date somebody you've never met. What? Crazy, right? Okay, we're going to come back after the break. See you very shortly.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back from the break. We just discussed my own personal story about how irresponsibility totally destroyed one of my relationships, and it was actually a longer relationship. So if you're interested in that dramatic tale, go back and check it out. If you already heard it, now we're going to talk about, oh my God, what the heck? I've never met him, but we're dating? What is this? How does that happen? Well, I will tell you, it is something called online dating. This happens through a multitude of different platforms. We see it on Facebook, Tinder, Instagram, sliding into those DMs. It can be, for me, it's been a lot of Tinder, a lot of Tinder, and some pen pal relationships off of pen pal apps. But it happens in a variety of ways. It's been going on since the days of MySpace. Rest in peace, MySpace. So what do we do when we find ourselves in a relationship where we have never met this person? And how do we know if we're getting catfished? Ooh, we'll talk about catfish in another episode. But right now we're going to talk about what it's like to be in an online relationship. So let's say you've never, ever met this person. First thing on our checklist that we want to do is go and make sure that they are who they say they are. You really want to just do a little bit of stalking, do some research, and use common sense. Don't just be hopeful. Go with your gut and really make sure that they are the person that they say they are. And you want to be careful as well about what you are saying to them. Also, make sure that you are sharing your real self when you are dating on the internet and you are trying to find somebody, because they will eventually find out. And if Neve and Max from Catfish, the TV show, come rapping at your door, you are going to be very embarrassed. So my life advice for you would be to share your real self, because your true self is amazing and beautiful and wonderful and unique, and you're awesome. So share your real self with the world, no matter who you are, and just, hope that you can be hopeful that the other person is who they say they are. But if you start to see those red flags, really investigate, do your initial research when you do first meet them. Look up their Instagram. Do they have other friends? Are they interacting with other people? Or is it something really sketchy? But yeah, just really do your research in the beginning to make sure that they are who they say they are. Then after that, you want to be careful about what you say to them. Are you sharing personal information such as bank account numbers? You don't want to send somebody money that you've never met because you don't know what they're doing with it. And there's been so many accounts where people just are sending money to this Nigerian prince. And no, I mean, it can be anything, but it's a complete scam. It's somebody trying to make money in an easier way. And as horrible as it seems, these people are out there. So you want to make sure that you're not sharing personal information. Don't share passwords to stuff because they can hack your accounts. You can just lose so much from sharing that personal info. That being said, you also don't want to share personal pictures because especially if you don't know them, those can end up in places that you really don't want them. So be careful about what you're sending to which people, what you're sending to who, because it can really just make a full circle and come back and kick you in the butt. So after you get like those kind of things checked out, maybe you're moving forward into this relationship, maybe you feel like, okay, it's time to meet them. How do you prepare for that? That is so stressful because you're about to meet this person that you've shared this intimate relationship with. And yet you've never physically touched them. You've never actually seen them in person. So how do you prepare for that? Well, first thing is you want to make sure you're meeting in a public place because that is how people get kidnapped, is by not meeting in a public place. So you want to meet somewhere where other people will be around and you want to have a way to just be safe and protect yourself. That being said, you know, not everybody is a predator. There are so many online relationships that work out. I just want everybody to be safe, so I'm putting that out there. So when you go into this, you have to keep in mind that they may not look exactly how you expect them to. There's so many times when people share, a lot of people change their appearances with editing on some sort of photoshopping program. I've even done it from time to time for, it's just those insecurities about yourself because you are your own worst critic. And it's totally expected. Just expect people to not look exactly the same as their pictures and be either pleasantly or unpleasantly surprised when you do actually meet them. But just keep an open mind that a picture of somebody, it's not gonna, it's a picture. It's one moment in time and it may be amended or not. But it's not going to be them forever. So keep in mind they are more than just a picture and they're more than just a few words over text messages or some phone calls. When you enter an online relationship and you've never met this person, just be prepared that you don't know exactly what they look like. They might be shorter, they might be taller, they might be a little bit heavier set, they might be thinner, they could be completely different, they might have a different hair color. And so just keep that in mind when you go in to meet them, because that could be a big shock to you or to them even. And keep in mind their personality, because a lot of people can be completely different when they're meeting for the first time, or even their whole overall personality in person can differ from how they act online. A lot of people tend to be so much more brave online because they have that shield. They have that screen in front of them protecting them from the scary outside world, but really they're completely different in person, or maybe they're a lot more shy, or they just keep a lot to themselves, very not talkative. It can be so different in every scenario, so just keep an open mind when you do actually go to meet your significant other for the first time, that they may not be exactly all that you imagined. And imagination can be so frustrating in these senses because you, especially when you've never met the person, and people with long distance relationships know this as well, but when you don't see someone for a long time or you've never seen them before, you start to imagine scenarios, you get these pictures in your head, you get ideas of this person, and those ideas, I hate to break it to you, those are not going to be reality. If you are dating somebody who is, maybe in Korea and you're like, oh my God, they look so good, they're Korean, you're going to be a pop star. They are not a pop star. They are just a normal person. I mean, maybe they are. If you got lucky, maybe they are. But for the most part, they're just going to be a normal person. And you have to expect everybody to have flaws, because everybody has flaws. You may think that they are the most amazing, gorgeous, perfect person in the world, but no. Nobody is made of porcelain. We all have our cracks. We all have our flaws. So keep an open mind to that and just expect them to not be everything of your dreams, because nobody is ever going to be. And a couple days ago, I actually quoted on Instagram, affection is when you see someone's strengths. Love is when you accept someone's flaws. So again, keep in mind, they're going to have those flaws, and that just makes them that person. And maybe you'll be more attracted to them when you accept those flaws, and you'll find out that you actually have a big heart. So keep that in mind when you are pursuing an online relationship. Another huge thing to keep in mind, because so often these online relationships are going to be long distance. Great things like Tinder, and I think Bumble does this too, and quite a few dating apps, they find people in your area. But there's so many cases where you are going to find somebody who lives either on the other side of the country, on the other side of the world. It can be so many different scenarios, but just keep in mind that you're not always going to be meeting somebody who is living in your, 10 minutes away. They could be an hour away. They could be a day's drive. They can be a 16-hour flight away. So be ready and be prepared for the reality after you do meet that if this relationship is going to continue, you both need to put in some work and some effort in order to make it work out. And in all, dating somebody and never meeting them for the first time is such a crazy concept for so many of us. And yet it happens almost every single day. And it's so weird. So my advice is just to be open-minded, be safe, be honest with them, and hope that they're being honest with you. Do your research. Don't get catfished, and just be prepared. Be prepared for that long-distance relationship. So in our final segment, I'm going to talk about some things you need to know before getting serious. That means things you know before going into a relationship. And that will be our final segment. Be sure to stay tuned, and I will see you after the break.
Are you looking to learn more about the latest trends from the fitness world? Are you confused by all of the different trends that are out there? The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place for you. The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place to come for people of all skill and interest levels. Join us as we explore the latest trends in the fitness world. Does that new exercise really work? Should I try yoga? Whatever your question, chances are good you'll find an answer on the GSMC Fitness Podcast.
Hi, welcome back to the final segment, and thank you for sticking in for the final segment of the GSMC Relationship Podcast Network. Today we have talked about so many wonderful things. We talked about irresponsibility and how it's a turnoff. We've talked about dating your coworkers, and we have also discussed what it's like to date somebody you've never even met, and some tips and advice to go about that. And finally, we're going to wrap up the show with some things you really, really need to know before you get serious and start a relationship. And this comes about different ways. You either come from friends, you started out as friends, you started off as FWBs, which is friends with benefits. And you may have, just started off as coworkers or acquaintances, like we talked about earlier in the episode. Or maybe you just found each other and your first thing was, okay, we're going to go on a date. So these are the things you need to consider before you get into a serious relationship with that person. And I'm just going to list off a few because I did a bunch of research on this for you guys just to make sure I'm getting the most important things. And the most common one, the most important one was, do they have an STD? That is a sexually transmitted disease. And you want to be very knowledgeable about this, and you want to be honest with this. If you do carry one, be sure you're sharing that with your partner, and there's nothing wrong with asking about it. If somebody does ask you, don't feel offended. They're just trying to keep themselves, healthy and safe, because that is very serious. All we can do for ourselves as humans is take care of our own health and safety. And a lot of those STDs, they don't go away, or it's very difficult to get rid of them. So please be honest with that, and just make sure that's one of your first things that you're paying attention to, making sure that you're honest and open about. I know this seems so strange to start off a relationship and already be talking about like marriage and kids. But if you're in it for the long run, it should already be okay between you two to talk about these things, because you're both agreeable that you're going to be in this for a long time. So you want to be sure, make sure that you both are in this relationship for the same thing. Are you in it for the long run? Are you in it just for however far it takes you? Are you just trying to gain some experience in the real world? Especially a lot of younger relationships, they're going to say, there's that hope, there's that initial commitment, like, oh, we're going to be together forever. Like, you're planning your marriage in high school. And that's so, there's so many couples there's tons of high school sweethearts. Don't get me wrong, but that's just so unrealistic to just assume it's going to be like that and hope for it. And I'm not trying to be a dream crusher, because it does happen. It can happen. And I've also seen it happen where it works out and they're together forever and ever and ever, and they're happy. And I've also seen it where they get to their 40s and they're suddenly getting divorced. So keep in mind what goals you have for the relationship. Do you have similar goals? Are you okay with the goals your partner has? Can you accept that? So make sure that you have the same commitments. Now, moving on from that, if you do have the same commitments and you're looking to go in for the long run, right? These are adult conversations that you shouldn't feel awkward about having, and you should really just feel comfortable about talking about, whether you're looking to have kids or not. Because if you're, 1 year, 5 years down the relationship, and you're like, okay, I'm committed to this person, and suddenly you find out, oh my God, they don't want kids, or oh my God, they want kids. So, that can just shatter your whole relationship, because now you're like freaking out, like, what's happening? And there's always the issue of people that aren't fertile, or whatever whatever issues they have, they can't have kids. And that becomes a whole different story. And it's not even the person's fault. So make sure you have that conversation before even getting serious. It doesn't have to be, hey, do you want to have kids with me? It can be like a brief thing, like, hey, do you just take a session, have a date night where you ask each other a bunch of questions and say, like, do you plan to have kids someday? It doesn't have to be a serious question. It can just be, do you want this in your life? Same as asking, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's the same thing. I know this seems kind of like not very significant, but you do want to know where they live, because you want to be sure that you're comfortable and accepted in the place that they live as well. If they're living on their own, like I mentioned earlier in the responsibility and irresponsibility section, is their place a pigsty? Because that, a person's home gives you a big insight on how that person acts. And so you really want to see where they live. Do they live with their parents? Are their parents okay with you dating? Do they live with roommates? Or do they live, you might be really jealous if they're living with roommates of the other gender, or the gender that they're interested in. So just keep in mind, where do they live? Are you going to be intrusive if you're in that area or in their space? So that's another thing that you really want to know before getting into one of these committed relationships. You also want to see, what are their future goals and how they see their future down the line, especially as far as their career, where they want to live, because these are going to have an impact on you as well. If you are expecting to live your whole life in your hometown, or you're expecting to travel the world, how is this going to coincide with your future partner's plans as well? And is their career going to take them all over the world? Are you going to be okay with having that time apart? These are things that you want to keep in mind as well. Also, you need to keep in mind, do they have a stable job, or are you able to rely on yourself for the both of you, or do you need to rely on the both of you? Because that's a big deal when one of you has a higher paying job and the other one doesn't. So you have to be sure that you're okay with the work they do, and you're either going to be okay with paying the same amount or paying less or more. Just make sure that you two are compatible in that way, where you're financially stable. Oh, this is such a great one. You need to consider what each other consider is cheating. Cheating it can have such a variety of terms, and there are people who are more jealous, who are less jealous, who are used to just kind of more looser relationships, who, haven't always had that commitment in a relationship or haven't felt as committed. So you need to lay down some ground rules as to where your boundaries are as a couple. And with cheating, is it simple flirting? It's different for everybody, especially when you're in an open relationship, but you need to have a conversation with your partner with what the both of you are comfortable with. Cheating is such a broad topic. If you guys are interested, let me know on social media, because I would be happy to go over any topics surrounding cheating. I'm sure there's so many, we could talk about so many on the show. But another one you should probably consider before getting serious in a relationship is how much time you guys actually need apart. Are you okay? Like, can you spend hours and hours on end with each other? I know this is a big deal if you plan to live together, especially in a smaller space, places like apartments, studio apartments. You need to consider like how okay you are with being in each other's space for a certain amount of time, or do you need that time apart? If one of you do, are you going to be acceptable of that time apart? Okay, and we also want to be sure that this person, you can accept their flaws, because usually, by the time you're looking to get serious, it shouldn't be like after one date. You should really get to know the person and be sure about it, because you want to be able to accept their flaws, and they could have some underlying things that you don't see at first, but just keep in mind things that kind of like tick you off, or just they're things that you like don't like about them. Think about it, because you're probably not going to be able to change them as a person. Don't expect to be able to change them or for them to change for you, because especially if it's things they're used to, the things that they accept into their lives, it's not right to try to change them. So don't enter a relationship just because you think that you're going to have a great relationship. Be realistic. Set those standards for yourself. Try to find what has and hasn't worked for you in other relationships. And that's going to make so much of a difference when you're trying to get into a serious relationship and maintain a stable one. It's just so important to find somebody and not end a relationship so fast, because that can be very damaging to the both of you. So these are just a couple of ways that you can start to figure out if you're ready for that serious relationship, things that you need to know before you're totally committed to that serious relationship. I hope that all of you are staying safe out there. Again, the world is so crazy right now. We've got pandemics, we've got killer wasps, we've got, now we have the riots and protests going on. So just stay safe, be kind to each other, enjoy a wonderful weekend, because it's going to be beautiful mostly around the country, and hopefully it's beautiful wherever you are. And I hope that you have just such a great time until our next podcast. Be sure, like I said, to check out our Instagram if you want to suggest any topics for the show. You can always reach out to me there or on Twitter. I usually do a Ask Me Anything story for Instagram, so you can also ask me on there. But thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Relationship Podcast, and this has been brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, if you could please subscribe to the show and write us a review, I would be so super grateful. That helps all of us here at GSMC. And also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we would love that. Thank you again. So just stay safe, like I said, and remember, have an awesome weekend. Thanks, and goodbye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.